Right, this is going to be another episode of the Best Damn League Show. I am Thorin. That is not Dom. So it's obviously not a Dom week, is it? So Jensen Goh returns from, at this point, the wilderness, actually. People don't know he technically isn't in esports anymore. It's just that one, obviously, we have a mutual appreciation society type thing going on. So I can draw him back in a little bit. Just when he thought he was out, I drew him back in, as the old mafia saying goes. And also, technically, it's not 100% out of choice. Like, if, for example, you out there were a good team who wanted a good coaching staff, maybe even you're going to Worlds or something in a few months. Jensen has come in many times over and worked as part of coaching staff, teams like Splice, etc. He's obviously worked in his own region, Southeast Asia. So he technically would, in theory, do the right gig. It's just obviously he's not trying to just get any random gig. So if you're out there and you actually have skills, hit him up. Otherwise, just shut up and listen to him talk about League of Legends now for an hour. So let's get into it, Jensen. Let's talk about some League of Legends. So here's what I thought we'd do to start out. Since I like to help people brand themselves too, everyone knows the angle I've heavily played up for you. Because what I've tried to do with each expert I brought on my shows over the years is try and show where like they're different from other experts, where they have their own approach. So for example, people will know famously, even though actually in the early days of LS getting very famous, people actually used to meme really hard when he would do all those analogies that weren't esports ones. Like actually funny enough, all the stuff they like now, like all the trading card game terminology. People hated that when LS did it wrong. In fact, I remember famously, me and Yamato almost had a fallout because Yamato made some tweet that was like, I don't think you should have to learn a trading card game to talk about League or something. I actually thought at the time he was taking a shot at LS. So I've always said with LS, I actually love the stuff everyone hates. I like it when he does the example of like, he relates like how players play to like Dragon Ball Z storylines. So I think that's actually his best work. So with your case, I've always pointed out, I actually like your systems-based approach to analysing the game. So people will know your famous branded element is, it's the contrasting styles, isn't it? It's the map control style versus the scaling / gold efficiency style. So what I want to ask at the outset, since everyone's flaming the LEC, everyone says it's basically like G2 and then who cares? In the LEC right now, do those styles still apply to the current game? Who would be in what bucket, as it were, and which style is winning out right now? Let's start out there.
So the interesting thing is that when I apply those systems, it's usually towards Worlds or MSI, where we usually see a much more complete picture as to what teams are like,
Sure.
right? When you prepare for an international event and when you do analysis for international teams, the gameplay approaches to something that's much more theoretical. So if you were to go back and look at some of my YouTube content, you already know that what these teams are going for, and because it's been drilled and refined to a rather high level, right? Where I can
Yes.
predict, like in the games between Suning and Damwon, these are the exact beats of what's going to happen in the game, and it's going to come down to this one team fight at this moment, and then these are the small factors that are going to influence the setup of the team fight, right? Things like, does the Wukong complete his 2 items before the fourth Drake or the soul fight at a point of time, and along those lines. But at domestic tournaments, it's a lot more what we call exploitative gaming, where a lot of times analysis that you do is that this player has this weakness in lane, he doesn't understand these scenarios, and this is how we can abuse that, or that
Right.
certain map setups increasingly so moves towards the latter things, where these teams they don't necessarily understand how to handle a situation when the lanes are pushed in, or when they do not have the ability to directly contest through mid, or they have some weaknesses around objective setups, and those things are going to be a lot more telling in terms of determining a game. So while it is possible to apply my systems and looking at saying that okay, there's certain teams who have these protocols, so based on that I can then say that they then fit into the map control style, and then some teams fit into the goal efficiency or the timing attack style, then it's not exactly going to have the same level of credence as compared to when you apply it to the LPL teams or the LCK teams going
Right.
into international events, right? But I would say that if we were to put things into baskets, I think that teams that have a much more defined ideas as to how to approach the game, things that jump out to me is the BDS and Team Heretics. Those are more towards the map control style. I think G2 is a team that definitely tried to play map control. And the interesting thing is that in the past, the Korean teams were the ones who were always doing this goal efficiency style. But of course, these things have muddled over time as well. And what we saw is that at this MSI was the G2 took that map control style against the T1 who was also playing very heavily into that. And then they didn't have the exact right protocols to adapt to T1's game. But here in the LEC, I still feel that in terms of understanding and knowing those protocols, G2 is still more or less a step ahead of everybody else. Right. And of course, there's Fnatic and SK, which I think we'll get to at some point in the show, and those are definitely more towards, I would say, is the a little bit more towards the goal efficiency style.
Right.
But the way that the modern game has evolved is that these two ideas have kind of blended in together.
Right.
And it kind of goes back to the way I look at it is the question is what does the team prioritize, right? Does the team prioritize, say, a safer approach where it then leads to a goal efficiency style? And then you see the teams having a low activity game. You don't see people staying on the map as much to cheese kills, and then they are simply resetting to go for waves. Whereas for the map control style, it's a lot more about setting up traps. It's a lot about more about defending the waves and hitting the timing space on the waves that you've defended accordingly.
Right. One of the teams I thought we could start with is because this split, what I've been trying to do a bit differently is instead of doing it where every episode is like, here's our thoughts on all 10 teams, and then you pick some to go through more, and then some you don't do as much, I've sort of instead been doing it where I just pick the teams I think it's interesting to talk about each week, and then, with another week, I'll talk more with it about another team, depending on whether they're relevant. So, for example, I have talked actually quite a lot on other episodes about, for example, Vitality, who's obviously just blown the split and ended up failing. So, we won't do that. What I thought we could do actually is the team I didn't talk about for a few weeks so much is Heretics. And the real problem, I think, here goes at is, Jensen. I think the reason I didn't focus on them much is they're clearly not a very good team right now. And the worst thing to me is, just from the construction, even on paper, you can see some clear flaws. Like, even though this Viru guy did play better than when Perks was bad in Heretics, and obviously had like a glow up in the playoffs, actually he's sort of regressed again. Like, actually, when he's not just on his ear all the time, he's not that great a player necessarily. And the crucial thing I always think of when I look at Heretics is I remember when, this is a few years back, you'll remember when initially Soaz went to LCS and played in Immortals, with Zabateen's Immortals team. And if you remember, that was the one where it was like Soaz, ex-Smithy. And it's like, when you looked at this team, it's like, these are actually some pretty good players. But as Dom famously pointed out, it's like you've got all supportive elements, but no carry. And so when you looked at that team, it didn't matter what they did on the map, what move they made. They just didn't have, they were what we say in English, like they were sort of toothless. They didn't have any ability to bite or to kill you. Like they almost couldn't win a game no matter what they did. I get that vibe from Heretics so much, mate. Like when I watch this team play, I'm like, even if players did things right in the game, like how are they going to win? Like where's the win condition? Who's the player I'm scared of if I'm playing Heretics? Or if I'm playing Heretics, what is it about their style that will put me off? I feel like to me, they're what you call like a much of nothing. It's like there's not really anything going on in this team for me. Do you see anything interesting in Heretics? Can you see, what do you think their problem is? What's the problem with the roster? Because again, these players clearly aren't all bad. I think some of them actually could be very good, but as a team, they seem kind of meh. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely think that that's the issue of Heretics, right? That this is a team that is definitely going through a lot of turbulence. I think with all the off-season drama happening, there's definitely a lot of red flags with regards to what's happening with this team. And it's one of those things where you talk about overall team cohesion, and this is one thing, and it's pure conjecture, right? I don't have any inside
Oh, of
sources
course.
or information, but just looking at the outside of it and just it's a little bit of projection here as well, but when I look at the way that they play in game, so let's talk about the in-game issues first before we talk to the possible reasons that might be happening
Yeah.
out of game. Is that this team is not on the same page, right? You see them just starting up things as three-man squads, and it's not even consistently the same three people, right? Is this Jankos calling for this? Is this his ideas as to what his approach towards the game is? And if this was any other team, it's just really illegal. You have no prior over mid, you have no prior over bot, and then you're starting Drake. Your AD carry is disconnected from the fight. They're starting Rift Herald. They are trying to rotate aggressively and taking these fights. That this is the game I'm thinking against SK that I have, where Trinity is just engaging into the opponents, where the with Zararu is still disconnected from them. There's a lot of these ideas that are happening, and it feels that this team never really came together. Right. And I think that this was something that was flagged as well when you hear the little clips from players they're talking about, oh, we think that Mad Lions and Team Heretics, these two teams are a little bit team boom, right?
Yes.
So I think in terms of that, where we look at what's happening out of the game, where Peter was going over there when they were replacing perks, when they were making these changes, he wasn't hearing about what was happening as well. Uh, was it some 200 IQ things just going on behind the scene? It's impossible to
It's
tell, right?
basically
But
implied, as far as I know, Jensen. I have a little bit of behind the scenes. Again, I'll
Mhm.
speculate. It's basically implied that, yeah, everything's gone boom. That's why even Peter's potentially stepping back. And now in the split summer, is he really the head coach? And obviously, Perks has gone, yeah, it clearly isn't just one thing or one loss. Like, it seems like they've just gradually broken apart, right?
Yeah, and it's something that I think is not just on the player level, right? At the management level, definitely something's
Yes.
happening as well. You do like this big show of having like a massive very widely publicized search for a coach, and then you let him
Yep.
go after 2 splits. So that's Curie in this case, and then bring in 2 Spanish coaches as well. I'm not too sure what's exactly happening over there, but this is definitely one of those things where it's brave flags all over the place, where as to what might be happening outside of the game. They might have pulled things together, made it into the playoffs itself, and then there might be like a let's try to pull things together as much as we can. And this team, they still definitely have the pieces to do that, right? But then it goes back to what you mentioned, where there's no one clear focal point. And as a coach, when you look at this, it's not about you don't necessarily look at star players, but who is going to demand the resources of the
Yeah.
team. And some teams achieve that by actually bringing in players who can do less. Because nobody wants to be the guy, especially in a team that's not doing well, to say that I'm going to be the limiting factor of the team. But it's a very counterintuitive thing where, in fact, sometimes doing that actually makes things simpler for your
Oh,
teammates,
sure.
right? Because it
Streamline it. Yeah.
narrows things down, it
Yes.
streamlines things, and then you
Yes.
don't have this plethora of options, and it becomes a lot simpler to say that, okay, this is going to be a one Exodia comp, this is going to be a plan B. We're just going to play 2 comps for the rest of the split, and I'm only going to play these 1, 2, 3 champions, and
Yeah.
that's it, right? Yeah.
No, I'd even say, by the way, I actually think that's even be the funny thing about that is when you ever mention that concept, I don't know if it's like ego, like fans want to believe players can do everything. But like the best example to me is, I mean, we talked about this on many times with Monty on Something Insight. I think T1 has done this at many times in history, Jensen, where they've just said basically to Faker, mate, you're playing 2 or 3 champions and we're just going to make every drafter on these 3 champions if we can. And then, as you say, it just sets everyone in their place, right? Now Gumayushi knows what he's probably going to play with the Azir or the Orianna, whatever. Now Zeus knows, will he get a carry this game? Will he get a tank? Like, actually, I agree with you. Like, it's the problem is when you use that term band-aiding, it sounds too much like you're just doing it because the guy's shit or one thing. But I agree, as a way to like set a way to play, because the obvious mistake teams make is everyone can't just go into practice and go, what is the optimal way League of Legends could be played, and then practice and do that. In fact, I'd even say, this is why I give this example for Heretics. I even think that's another thing I don't like about Heretics. I almost feel like, this is why I wonder if you're right, and maybe they're just already boomed and they're just going through the motions of collecting the salary. Because it almost looks like they don't do what we're talking about and cynically like streamline the team and say, right, let's just play through this guy or let's get this guy ahead. Instead, it almost looks like they all just turn up like it's a 9 to 5 job in the scrims. I'm sure they watch the VODs, they watch the T1 VOD, the Gen G VOD. They listen, oh yeah, coach, yeah, we should have started Baron a little bit later, maybe and then they play the game, but they play the game as if they weren't this team. They play the game as if they were any team. And I hate that approach. I've got to say, unless you're like maybe G2 could do that because they've got such good players and they have so many styles they could experiment with. But I feel like if you're a team like this, especially for the last split, even if it's cynical, just pick a player or two who actually can do it. Like, by the way, I'll tell you what's funny. Here's an example where narratively people wouldn't expect me to say this, Jensen. Obviously, when Flackhead was on G2, I used to get mad at fans trying to pretend like he was fucking Uzi I, whereas it's like, bro, if anything, I mean, here's the analogy. If you actually know Chinese League of Legends, he'd be more like Son or something from the old OMG. His job was never to be the star carry. His job was to be a really good ADC who doesn't get the resources and makes the best of that. And then every now and then when it's the right company's fed, then he would carry the team fight. In this team, they've been so whack in this Heretics. I would even be fine with this guy getting the resources, man. I actually think he could even carry the odd team fight. Like, certainly not a bad play. In fact, he's probably got the best floor of any player on Heretics. But you look at the other names, bro, these other names, some of these are going to be Hall of Famers, but they're all very good now. Like, Jankos is in a bad shape. Trimby's kind of, as you say, I don't even think Trimby's bad. I just think he's disconnected from the other players in the team. Wonder is just kind of whatever at this point in time. I think most people know year on year, it's just gotten a bit worse with him. He just clearly, I don't even think he wants to be the carry threat. That's the worst thing there, It doesn't even feel like he's saying, give me whatever, Renekton or something. It feels like he's just playing whatever they ask him to. So this is one of those teams that does just feel a bit meh, like I say. I don't know, I don't even hate on them. They're just whatever.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where they need to be a little bit more cynical or conduct some triage and really figure out where
Yeah.
they have to go. But even watching
What would you do? I mean,
teams,
I just gave a pure speculation. What type of, if you had these pieces from what you've seen, what would like be it might have to be a drastic one. What would be a drastic change you'd make? How would you try and reformulate this 5-player lineup to be good? What would you do? Just as a theory craft,
I'm definitely just gonna um it's definitely going to be building around Drake stacking, and it's going to be putting Trimby back on the China
Right.
supports. I know that everybody right now is playing melee engage
Sure.
supports, right? But this is one of the things where I think bring Yankos onto something that's a little bit more high activity. I know it's not the
Okay.
meta, but it's one of the cards are saying, right? When you play well, you become the meta. At this point, the way that they're playing is putting the resources on Zwiru and Flacken.
Yes.
And as much as putting resources into Flacken to be the central carry is a possible route, some of the things that I'm seeing on stage where the mistimed flashes against the Azir ults and stuff like that,
Sure.
this is not something that inspires
Yes.
confidence, right? So let support and jungle do the work. Trimby has always in the past been very dominant when he's been put
Yeah.
into the range support meta, and then just put that play this different style from what everybody else is doing and force it so that other people have to prep for something that's different as compared to what other people are doing. You won't be going to win the finals, but even using this, it might get you some wins. It might extend the amount of time that you're playing in the playoffs and hopefully get you somewhere in the season finals, right? Have a distinct enough play style, make it difficult to prep for you because nobody else you're scrimming is going to play the same way that they're doing. If everybody buys into this whole global meta thinking ideas that are out there, I know there are definitely reasons as to why people aren't playing Enchantress at the moment, but it's definitely leaning back into their strengths. And I think that going back into that, having a very honest exercise in what are our strengths, what are the ways that we can effectively win games is something that this team needs to do.
No, I'm with you. I mean, again, if you look at the team, you have to, at the moment, right, essentially people are almost looking and asking what they don't have. I would do what you do. I would just ask what they do have. And one of the things you clearly have is Trimby's one of your biggest strengths. So I'm with you. Fuck the matter, just play what he's good at. Like we all know, and Chanty's, he has actually OP, like he can do so much in the game. I'm with you, yeah. Good angle. Right, let's flip. What about this? A team that has been discussed to death is obviously Carmine Corp, but I actually feel like the framing is terrible on all the shows I watch it on, mate, because people keep doing the framing of connecting it to the past rosters, but it's only upsetting Targamas. I mean, like, first of all, you might have left after the first split, and then the top side of the map, which were the original, like, ERL split, they're not even here. So to me, I want this. What is the fresh take? If we delete everything from past splits, if we pretend this was a brand new roster, obviously upsetting Targamas did play before, we pretend this brand new one with Canna, who we all know from T1 back and D Plus back in the day, and fucking Closer, we obviously know from 100 Thieves and Golden Guardians and all that jazz, and Vladdy, most people don't know, but was a prospect in the RLs. If you just look at this roster alone, ignore all of the context of the past, what do you think of this Carmine Corp?
I think that this is an example of that cynical approach done correctly, right? Where they looked at it and said that what are our assets? How do we build around those assets? And as much flame that the GM might have gotten for making those decisions early on, being able to pull this together for summer and getting their results is definitely a positive sign for whoever took on the mantle, right? Of making these roster changes, bringing these things together, and then now they're actually able to build around Upset and Turgamas to the bot lane, and you see Upset getting a lot of resources, and they are able to occasionally
Yep.
pull off the wins. And notice that their wins have not been against the teams that are above them in the bracket, right? So
Yes.
they're not going to be pulling off upsets. They're just simply picking up wins against these other teams that don't have their things together. They're going in there, and it's the classic case of you have a plan, the opponents don't have a plan, and having a plan beats not having a plan. So I'm not very excited about this. But my take is this is triage done successfully. They've
Yes.
salvaged a season. They've made playoffs. They've collected a few wins here and there, and they're no longer the laughing stock of
Yes.
the LEC, which unfortunately has gone to very deservedly so for Rogue, and unfortunately so for Vitality.
Yes. No, I'm with you. I actually think the main thing I would say for this Carmine Cop team, because it's implied, if you look at where they are in the industry and what they're likely to do, like probably that Calista guy's almost certainly coming next year. It looks like they've just, as you say, they've just put together a roster where they've just made it very simplistic, and it's more like just play out the roster. There's no way this one goes to next year anyway. Just play and essentially like audition for other teams, because if you look at this squad, everyone's pretty much a known quantity. Like everyone knows Canna anyway. He's not like, here's the thing: if you're a fan who's watched like Thanatos just went to Cloud9, that is a player with a prospect who could be like a dominant figure. Canna isn't going to be him because we already saw him on fucking the teams I talked about. He's just an all right player who never, by the way, was never the guy you played through as a carry to carry the whole game anyway. As anyone who watched those teams know, like on D Plus, they love to play through carry tops, and it wasn't that great when Canna was there. He wasn't terrible, but he was never an elite player for me. So then you go Closer. I mean, he is a little bit washed, but again, he's an own quantity. You know, he's how he's going to play in the game. That's obvious. The Vladdy guy, I actually think fair play if they keep him. Seems like he does have some skills. He's a rookie, but but I've seen some decent games. And I'm with you. It is clear in this team, maybe because, like I say, I think it's his last split with them. It does seem like they are catering to upset now. They're trying to give him, like, I mean, he definitely gets his picks, by the way. They get on that Zeri anytime he wants, it looks like. So I do think you have seen much better games this split from upset. The problem he has is, even in the wins, it does look a little bit like, I think it was Dom said something like, he looks like he's been beaten into submission. I thought, what a great way to phrase it, because it looks like he's just been so traumatized by all those games earlier with the past lineups that he never fully like allows himself to like totally unlock his game. Now he does it to like 85% or something, because I feel like I would speculate him and the Target Armors have had the greatest synergy, etc. Obviously, these are brand new players. I mean, it's a pretty weird lineup he's playing with. So I'm with you. It's actually not that bad a team now. Like you said, they've beaten everyone below them in the table. The problem is, though, there's not really any reason, because now they're in the playoffs. You don't look at them and think like they can beat a top team, they can do an upset. Like you say, they're kind of a known quantity, right? I think even everyone playing them is going to know how they play.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I think, unfortunately, the narrative around KC will be because of how big a name Yamato Cannon is. This year will be remembered for what happened in the first
Of
half
course.
for them. They had both
Yes.
their Yamato Cannon, those things did not work out, and that's what they'll be remembered for. The second half, it was salvaged, but it wasn't salvaged to a point where
Yes.
it raised people's memories of what happened in the first half.
Yes. Because, like, for example, they in the opening round of the playoffs played G2. Like, that's a loss instantly. And then their problem is, I'm looking if they go to the lower bracket. Like, bro, they basically have to hope they get what, like GiantX, Mad Lions, you know what I mean? There's not, maybe they can win like a low bracket match, but logically, second round low brackets when I have them going out. I think they lose to whoever they play there, probably, right?
Yeah, probably. I was even trying to see if there was like any world in which that they can try to find at least one game against G2. But G2, they are putting Hansam on the Ashe, the Caitlyn. We might even see the Draven come out again, and that's going to completely shut down whatever Casey's trying to do through the bot lane with upset. So I don't have much hopes for them in that matchup. And then in the lower bracket, it really depends on who they draw. If they draw um I don't even really think that's someone that they can draw, and I would say that I have them as the favorites to beat. Maybe Team
Right.
Heretics if things continue to go down the slide. Uh, Mad Lions, that is the one where there's a little bit more. I think that one's going to be the interesting one, right? Where even though I would think most people will consider how badly Mad Lions have been playing, I think that might
Okay.
actually be an even game between those two teams.
Okay. Right, let's do G2 actually, because on past episodes, I actually somewhat skipped G2 because I thought it was a bit boring. Like, I will say the same script seems to play out. Like, the funny thing is, even though in week one they made it spicy by losing those games, they still won every fucking game after that. Like, this team's just too good for the region, mate. Like, I actually think the funny thing about G2 is if you look split to split, it's not even like it's always the same players. Like, basically, Caps always plays well, but they sort of cycle the others. Broken Blade has a split, then Hadsama has a split. It doesn't matter. It seems like who plays well. So, what is the current being as? We're obviously days away from them playing at the Esports World Cup. We'll talk about that later on in the episode. Right? What current level of form do you have G2 in right now?
Think they're pretty high in form. I think Caps is in great form. He's really playing very well mechanically and individually. And this is something when Caps is playing really well, this is when G2 is at the earliest, right? This is something that Caps has always been the X factor for whenever G2 is showing up at these events. And a Caps on form is, I think, is something that teams would really struggle to have. Even against things like the game against Team Heretics, he was just individually just putting up such a difference making performance against Sviru in the mid lane and against Humanoid as well. I think it's just outclassing all the other mid laners at this point of time. And between what they have in terms of the macro, between their, I would say, I wouldn't say for sure that they have this is going to be the G2 that we're seeing for the rest of the year because there's only effectively halfway through the season.
Sure.
But they've shown that they have the ability to take the fight, the teams. I think MSI was definitely going to be a very interesting inflection point for them, right? Because I don't think that there was a G2 that was underperforming. I think that was a G2 that was close to firing on all
Yes.
cylinders. And then that was a team that was still unable to replicate what they had in 2019.
Yes.
Because unlike 2019, where they were very clearly ahead of understanding of the Korean teams as to how to play the modern game. The same cannot be said. And in fact, it's T1 who was ahead in terms of their understanding of the
Yes.
protocols. as how to play that. Thankfully, though, I think that BDS can actually provide them a challenge in the macro sense, and it's one of those things where if I feel that they can look at that, they can get the correct practice against BDS. There's some hope for them moving forward. So I'm really looking forward to the G2 BDS game when it happens in playoffs.
I'm with you. I actually think in both those series at MSI, actually individually, the G2 players were outplaying the T1 players. The problem is, as you say, there's a reason they couldn't close the game out. You know what I mean? Like T1 actually just had to hang around and then they could just get the wins at the end, especially in that second series where it was like the 3-0, even though obviously it was very close, to be fair. So what about this then? I would ask you this. One thing I think is interesting about Caps is I actually do feel like because people who are Caps fans are going to say he's the best every year, I feel like he can actually undersell this year. I think this year is like a contender for his best year ever, mate. Because the other thing about Caps is I always used to think it was really fascinating narratively, almost in an anime storyline style, that when you used to have the old classic of Caps and Perks, and they were both the very best Europe ever produced, you had two very different styles of players. Like on the one hand with Perks, he never was a lane god. It's more like he was just pretty good at most points of the game, and then he would just do like the really smart, captain's move or macro move at the end of the game that would like do some hero flank that would win the game for you. And with him, it was more like you felt like he was the ultimate closer, he was the clutch player, as it were. That's why he had that amazing stat of like winning a million of those game fours, If you just got him to that like moment when everyone else would be nervous, he'd make the decisive play. The difference was, I always thought the reason people had that craps narrative for Caps is because Caps' main strength was skill. It was like ability to make crazy plays and beat people with his hands. But I always thought back then he was a lot more hit and miss, and a lot of it was like you didn't always know, is this the game going to be where he makes a big mistake late in the game and throws him it, or is he going to win the whole team fight when you have a team fight? I think the Caps of today has somehow maintained all his strengths. He has way less downside, and actually he's taken on a little bit of that Perks quality for me now, mate. I feel like now he's become a much better, like, closer player as well. Like, this is a guy where if you give this guy a lead, I trust him to close the game and carry the rest of it, I feel like he's gotten really sort of like a killer instinct. What do you think?
It's not just a killer instinct; it's his ability to really play on the edge. And one of the things, even back in the day when I was helping out with Splice, is that this was something that Caps was able to do very well. He has a very impeccable sense of timing to buffer his movement abilities to bait out spells from the opponents, right? Things like channeling the Azir Shuffle, not the ulti combo, right? But even the sliding moves and things like
Right.
that, while buffering that through crowd control, so that you're effectively moving while the stun time is ticking down on you. We see him do that. We see him do that quite a fair bit, and it's because he's playing on the edge. Where I think you have this disaster moments where I think they threw a game against T1 with him getting caught on the mid lane on
Yes.
Tristana, right? And but we see him be willing to do these sort of things, and sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes it ends up like the game against T1, but increasingly so, this has been very successful, right? We see him bait out the Leona engage, which I think single-handedly won the game against Fnatic, where he baited Juke to go in onto him. He buffed the cocky Valkyrie away, and then all of a sudden there's a Leona that's completely out of position for the rest of the team. And it's this little micro moves, it's things that you can't teach a player, right? And that is the quality of Caps, which is why it makes him the best millionaire in Europe by such a wide margin. Because it's not something that as a coach you can go and say that, yeah, you see this thing here. When you see this, I need you to have the reaction speed to be able to buffer this in
Sure.
this way,
You can't teach
right?
that. Yeah, true.
You can't teach that.
True. What about the one angle I would do, because we can now frame it against the Esports World Cup, is when they go there, obviously in the opening round they play FlyQuest, right? Most people expect them to win. I mean, a reason why I will also add in is obviously the main change in FlyQuest was Jensen went out and they brought in Quad. But Quad is going to be such a rookie. By the way, I don't even blame him if he does bad. He's essentially in his rookie split, he's going to have to go to an international tournament and play a mega experienced player in Caps and a really good team. So on that one, I expect them to get past that. But obviously the interesting thing is in the semi-finals, if they get there, they will play the winner of Gen G and Top Esports. Now, first of all, that's actually more interesting than people realise, because one, at MSI, Top Esports took them to 5 games, Gen G. And then two, actually Top Esports might even be the best LPL team right now. They look pretty good. Obviously, Gen G's mega. But obviously, you think to yourself, there's a world where it might be Gen G against G2. What do you think of either? If they play Top Esports or Gen G, how would you sort of shadow box G2 against? How do you think they'll do against either opponent?
And I think that against Genji, it's something that stylistically I favor the way that the G2 plays, right? I
All
think that this
right.
is a more proactive style. In fact, even in the domestic matchups, whenever I see T1 go up against Gen G, even all the excuses aside, I prefer the more proactive, lane
Right.
dominant approach towards things. So the way that Gen G has evolved, and the reason why Gen G has been beating these lane control teams, is that they have been putting Chovy very actively on the side lane, and
Yes.
then that him going in and the very active teleport to then push in the extra wave stops the map control team from being able to get those deep side lane pushes and to then get the effective map control, right? So that and we saw, I think, during MSI when T1 played against Gen G. I think this was last year already, actually at this point, where they actually
Okay.
had this brilliant trap where they set up for Chovy, where they knew he was going to teleport to the side lane, so they had this trap prepared for him, but they would then have these wards to then pick him off in that scenario. Those are the exact tactics that I think G2 will have
Right.
to find. Like, how do we deal with Chovy getting the extra wave in the neutral position on side lane so that we can then get the deep pushes in to then enable our play style, right? Because if they were to try to go up against Genji, play a long game and contest them in the mid lane, for a 5v5 team fight, it might be possible, especially with the form that Caps and the rest of the team is. Even Hansama has been playing very, very well mechanically, right? I know that for a while he was criticized for not being the best team fighting AD carry, but you see some of the movements he's making. I'm not sure if this is a result of coaching or him putting in the practice and stuff. His movement has gotten very, very good in the team fights that we're seeing in the LEC. So I definitely have hope for them in that scenario, even if they're not able to find those tactical plays against G2, against Gen G. It's against similar teams that play the same map control style as them, where I would feel that they don't have the necessary reps in Europe because nobody else actually plays this map control style in the same way that the top map control Asian teams do, where I feel that they will struggle because then you end up playing in the exact same style, but you do not, like you're just playing against a better team, right? So I actually felt that T1 or things like that would be a worse matchup for them. And in the case, top esports might be a similar challenge for them because this is another team that has the map control push towards things. I mean, of course, like I said, this has been much diluted as well. But when it comes to the core ideas of connecting support and jungle, controlling certain areas of the map, being able to defend the waves that are coming out, I feel that the Asian teams that understand this have this mentality towards the game, but then have the natural advantage over G2. And that's they do the same thing that because it's not like 2019 where they had this understanding advantage over how the game was meant to be played, where they would repeatedly push in these side lanes and then they'll catch the Korean teams on
Yes.
neutral
They could always be a
objectives.
step ahead, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
right. So that advantage is no longer there for them. So you can look at it and say stylistic matchups. I actually, even though Genji is arguably the better team, I actually fancy G2's chances against Genji more.
Okay. Because the other thing is, obviously, they did play top esports at MSI, but again, two factors there. One, like I say, I actually think G2's players were all pretty much having like the game of their life for that tournament. There was a lot of really good individual performances. And then secondly, the counter to that is, I actually think some of the top esports players shit the bed a bit. Like Cream himself's a rookie. I actually did think he looked like he got pressured. What's his name? I actually think Jackie Love was fine. I think 369 maybe wasn't as good as people thought he would be. Obviously, everyone hopes he should be the best top player in the world. Like, there were some flaws. Do you expect a better performance from top if they play them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the trio definitely was an overperformance and performance on both sides, and it's something that I wouldn't say is going to be. You see, the thing is that because it's two teams with similar ideas and approaches towards the game, it's hard to predict an outcome. But when
Right.
one team you feel has more quality over the other, you're going to see a very close game in general, right?
Yes.
But you cannot say that there are these tactics and that there are these reasons as to why one side will win out. It just comes down to player quality at the end of the day, and it comes down to what the prep is like, how the players are feeling, how the condition on is on the day itself. Um, when I made the previous statement, it made it sound like Top Esports is like a 70-30 favorite against G2, but it's in reality it's probably something like a 55-45
Yeah, that's fair.
favorite
That's fair.
in one side's favor, right?
Yes. Right, being as Rogue is done, like literally their year is over in fucking early July. Dude, before even Independence Day in America, they can just all fuck off and have the rest of the year off. That is so insane to me. Like, so that there's a flaw in this format, guys. We've got to figure. We're not Valorant. We can't just have the whole half a year off and say we're pros. Not least because in theory you're all still getting paid month by month. Like, it makes me even wonder, what do you do with the team? Like, do you make them? Do you force them to come in the office and play anyway, even though they're not in? Like, who the fuck knows at that point? So let's have some parting thoughts on on Rogue because, I mean, I think most people understand the roster's been a bit underwhelming. They've been obviously terrible in the game. Like, I actually think in a weird way, the biggest criminal thing about this team, Jensen, I'll contrast it against the teams that have been memed on in past splits. So in that first winter split, when everyone was laughing at Carmine Corp, I'll tell you what, mate, at least Carmine Corp would sometimes get like early leads or have kills, and they would sometimes get to a point where you're like, maybe board upset can do something. Bro, Rogue is also just boring. That's the criminal sin is they're really bad and they're boring. So it's like, give me your take. I'm kind of glad this team's gone. I don't want to watch them play. I'm a big Larson fan, but I do not want to watch this team play, mate. It's bad.
No, nobody wants to watch this team
No.
play. It's good reasons to bet rubbish. That's my thoughts on Rogue. This team is actively awful to watch. The way that they play the game, they just sit around, they do nothing. They just sit and collect farm, hope that people make mistakes. They play this very reactive game style, and they try to play exploitative, which is once again, it's one of those things that um has always been the Rogue playbook, right?
Yep.
But in this case, if you want to be exploitative, then you need the players with the technical competency,
Yep.
so that you're not the ones being exploited instead. So
Yep.
if you're going up against teams that are like full of errors, like Vitality and Team Heretics, they're making all these aggressive plays and the team is not together and stuff like that. You can like find the odd win here and there. I don't even recall who were the teams that they found wins against, because but this
They
is this is
beat,
a team that.
let's see. Oh, they beat Heretics and Vitality.
Oh yeah, so it was exactly those two teams, right? Because these are the two teams that are, I would say, more in a developmental approach towards things. So,
Sure.
or rather, what that was the case for Vitality, right? And Team Heretics are just not on the same page. And if you want to play exploitative, then people who are actively making bad decisions, you're going to find the exploits against them. But against other
Yes.
people who have a plan, they're coming together, and they're just making less mistakes than you. Then, when you have that level of quality of players across the board, um, you're going to be the ones at just making mistakes, falling behind, and then the ones being exploited instead.
The funny thing is, I know you're a bit of a football fan because you often make references to like Premier League teams and stuff. Today on Summoning Insight, when we recorded it, I actually had someone in the viewer questions section ask who would be the Gareth Southgate of League of Legends, because obviously the example is like he has an amazing England team, but people think he plays too defensively and he doesn't like open the game up, and he has all those like amazing midfielders he doesn't use. And, he essentially does the same thing. He basically plays to win 1-0 and hope he just perfectly never concede a goal, which isn't really a very good style. Now, obviously, Rogue sucks. They're not like England. But the reason I actually said maybe Freddie122 should be the Gareth Southgate of League is because, one, when he actually had the really good roster, he still played a really sort of scared style like this, where it's like, again, you had to like play perfectly and you tried to like do correct reactive move. But I'm with you. Like, they were never the team like a Fnatic who just go all out there and, play off skill and stuff. So, yeah, I actually have to say, it was okay when you were winning, you were really good, but that style's even worse when you've got a bad roster and a bad team. And then like you said, they're trying to play almost like counter-attack League, but they don't even have the pieces to do it. Like, these pieces can't get it done. You just, as you say, you're going to get exploited while you're waiting to see your perfect hole to go into, as it were. So, no, I'm with you. Fuck that team. We'll move on ourselves. Let's move to Fnatic, because obviously then we can preview them at EWC as well. Right? Obviously, Fnatic, they never changed any players. Quite frankly, they even play quite similarly. I think this is one of the biggest known quantities in the league. Like, I think everyone's even learned finally by now that when Fnatic has a really awesome BO1, you go cool, but you don't take it too much to heart, because the next BO1 might be a complete mess and they might win just by people having hands, Razork doing a kill in a team fight. Humanoid might have the odd good game like he sometimes does. I noticed, by the way, fair play to him. At least now it's like, I notice it's more in the regular season he phones it in. At least he turns up internationally and does the odd playoff game. Where's Fnatic at for you? Because obviously I actually think everyone except G2 fans really wants to believe in Fnatic, because the difference is, I said before, Heretics, like, doesn't matter how well they play, they don't have the firepower. If anything, the one thing Fnatic has is the firepower. They have the real ability to punch a G2 on the nose, or anyone, and if Humanoid and Razork turn up, they can have they can carry a game, they can carry a game from the beginning. So where is Fnatic at for Jensen?
Oh, I don't have them very high at the moment. I think that
Okay.
this is something that June, Razork have been carrying this team for quite a fair bit. And it comes to the firepower, it's the humanoid hide and jackal show, right? That has always been the case whenever
Yes.
he's on the team. It definitely has been a lot better this year, but he still has these thinkers once in a while, and I think that this
Yep.
is a team that um its glaring flaw is going to be Noah, right? And this is one of those things where
Sure.
it's really hard to look at it because I'm looking at the game that they had against G2. He's on the Astral, and I'm looking at his positioning and the amount of damage that he's doing in the team fight. If you want to be a top level team, the way that he's positioning behind is not exactly a mechanics thing, it's an understanding thing of where you have to be. So
He's a bit defensive, right, in his positioning.
yes, but it's not fair for me just to criticize Noah because this is one of those things where was this a focus for Fnatic when they were
Right.
learning these things? Because
Sure.
when we were talking about Fnatic in the Winter Split, we were saying that this is what they're focused on. They were probably looking at team fighting and some of
Yes.
these elements, which is the how do you win games of League of Legends?
Yes.
You win the fight over Nash, and then you win the Nash, and that's probably one of the easiest ways, right? Because then that secures you the Nash or the opponent then throws over the Nash and then converts that directly into a win. So but I'm looking at some of these Drake setups, the way that they're allowing people to just walk in there, Noah's ability to do damage in the fights, people knowing their jobs in these scenarios, and of course, like I said, Caps definitely outplayed June in one of those scenarios. But if I'm looking at the rest of the team fight, I'm not very confident that this is going to be a Fnatic win, even if Caps doesn't make the play on June himself. So this is one of those things where, as much as the mojo is there for Fnatic that they win fights over the mid lane or neutral objective setups, I think this is one of the areas where the other top teams have caught up to them. They understand that this is how we want to be approaching how we want to be controlling these areas. And it's one of those things where I feel that their edge over the rest of the LEC has kind of disappeared. Yes, they have the firepower. Yes, they have the mojo. But tactically speaking, I do not think that they have that edge anymore. So that's the reason why I'm not particularly high on them. I do think that they're still decently high up. So they're not going to be losing to a Giants. They're not going to be losing to a K Corp. The game against SK is going to be
That
interesting,
one's a
but I think the
spicy one, right?
BDS. Yep. I think the BDS and G2 are definitely a cut above
Yes.
Fnatic at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious angle, if you're a fan out there, is like at the moment, it doesn't look like anyone's going to challenge G2. So instead, what you want to look for is the battle for second place. Because as you say, the BDS Fnatic SK thing, that even feels like a bracket draw could decide that. You know what I mean? Like, that's a pretty interesting trio of teams. Because I could even see that being like a rock, paper, scissors thing. Let's see how it plays out, right? Are you hyped for that angle? Because I do think SK is
I
the obvious like injection of interest into the split, you know?
I mean, I've always been very high on BDS, and I feel the SK they have been they are the rogue, they are the modern day rogue, right? They have the firepower, they have the quality in the players to play this counter-attacking style, right? But they have just
Yes.
been playing these very reactive games, and I think that there's some very clear examples of them just catching trolls from
Oh,
opponents.
for sure.
And interesting enough, it's against Fnatic, where they themselves were the ones who threw against
Yes.
them. But in general, they have been the beneficiary of some very egregious trolls, be it the one against Vitality in the
Yep.
past
That
day,
was
or even the
ridiculous.
game against BDS
Yep.
earlier on in the season, right? Where that was
Yes.
one of those things where I felt that BDS um they were beating SK at every turn in the game until they threw on the Nash because they got a pick on somebody and then they took a bad Nash start in a scenario. So I don't have SK particularly high. But that's once again just looking at it from a is this something that's going to work internationally? I
All
don't.
right. Sure.
Even if they do make it, I'm not going to be very excited about them, right? Because there's difference in player quality. You're not going to have that against the Asian teams, but at the domestic level, it's still a very effective way to win and find yourself in the green column.
Yes, that's actually something to pivot and ask about BDS. It's one of the reasons why people don't seem to get that I'm actually. Here's what's funny. I can't say I'm like a fan of BDS because I associate so much with the fans and all the shit talking. But like the way that the team BDS plays League, I am a fan of actually, Jensen. I actually find it quite. I often say I call them like the LCK team of the LEC because I actually like the fact that like it makes sense how they exploit mistakes from the opponent, how they like play around objectives and actually get the wins, and they don't have to win. They're not just smash lane, win game. Like I actually can't. There is like a cerebral element to this team. The obvious fear I have is what you said at the end there. It's like if I try and transpose that to the international domain, I feel like they just get the shit beaten out of them, and then when they went to catch the throw, well, you won't catch the throw if it's a sick LPL team that you catch it from, it just destroys you in the fight. Like that throw all of a sudden wasn't a throw; it just an air miss, I guess, in this analogy, right? So the obvious problem I have with them is like part of me wants to give them credit. Like I always say, to me, this is a team where like it just must be well coached. It has to be. Like you just look at the way they play. 5 players thrown into a server would not play this way. They wouldn't have this discipline. They wouldn't hold the lines. Clearly, by the way, they also sometimes know what the actual right counter-attack type move to do is. Like I do see like, so again, my problem is just player strength, but I do see some brilliant things in BDS. You said you're a fan. What do you think?
Always been a fan of BDS. Every time I come on this show, at least with my framing of the game, where I'm examining the
Yeah, it
protocols that
makes
teams
sense.
have, BDS definitely scores very high on my metrics because of the way that they approach the game. They understand when they need to play on 2 lanes. They know how to very effectively defend situations when the opponents have priority over mid. So it feels that this team, they understand a lot of the key components when it comes to playing the modern game of League of Legends. Of course, how well would this do in an overseas context, in an international context? I think it's something that it's one of those things where if you are already playing a complete package, then I can look at the tactics that you have and say that these are the stylistic matchups. And then within that, you have the ability to then make adaptations in drafts. You then have the ability to say that, okay, this is the player that we want to pinch out. This is how we're going to approach the meta. And I think that in the right meta, if they draw the right style of opponents, they can actually do damage internationally. It's not going to be a only one
Okay.
team show with G2
Okay.
possibly doing it, right? I think the BDS, if they go over there, people are not going to people are not necessarily going to know how to immediately deal with Adam. And I
Oh, for
think that
sure. Yeah.
being in the play-ins at Worlds last year did them a disservice. I'm not sure how much of it was them not being experienced doing an international campaign at Worlds
Sure.
last year as well. But when he just starts busting out the Garen top and Darius and stuff like that, and it's your first time playing against that on stage, this is a team with enough walkout factor to then, I feel, compensate for the fact that they don't necessarily have the star player or firepower to compete with the likes of Chovy and Faker, things like that, right? Once again, I'm not going to say that the expectations to set it accordingly. This is not going to be like, can they beat the next G2 and are they going to be a contender to make the semis and finals? This is if they make it out of groups, if they make it to the top 8, it's there's a world where that happens, and that would be them achieving overpower, right?
I'm with you as well. I also do think like it's actually quite logical that fuck, what was you saying earlier? Oh, that's it. The Adam factor. First of all, he is a player where it's just obvious, like you said, you have to play him once already, kind of know what to do the second time. That's what everyone says domestically and above. And then the other factor is the other reason it works is because until you've played him, loads of pros, including top Asian players, are going to actually be egotistical and go, give him his stupid pick. That's crap, and I can deal with it because they're thinking of like a random solo queue game they played against like a Darius, and they're thinking, he can't really do it. And they're not realizing they're actually giving him everything he wants. And like, he's played that matchup 1,000 times and you've played it 2.5 times. So you're right. It's obviously like the surprise factor. If they catch you the first time around, I agree. Like in the Swiss, for example, they could win a BO1 over one of these top teams. Just one off where they just get a draft where, like we say, they get the kind of the right picks for Adam or Labrov or something. I could see them win a BO1. I forgot to ask for Fnatic. Obviously, Fnatic, this is where the EWC is kind of fucking shenanigans, isn't it? Like, so we have a world where BLG plays T1 and Gen G plays Top Esports, but then Team Liquid plays Fnatic. It's like, me thinks he wanted a Western team in the semis, but okay. So obviously this one, we already saw MSI. We saw Team Liquid actually like fucking made Fnatic look silly and beat them. So what do you think of the rematch? Does Team Liquid get them again? Obviously they still have the macro strength, right? Can Fnatic beat them? What are your thoughts? It's only a BL3. What do you think of that matchup?
It really comes down to how the sports interact on the mid lane waves, right? I think that June has done the best when he's playing the likes of Ronaldo, when he's playing the likes of
Sure.
Dom, and then you have Razor on the engage to be the one to pull the trigger. When June has been playing a lot of these engage supports, this where I feel that the team is not that June is playing bad. I feel that the team doesn't know how to coordinate around having
Right.
the engage support, and I think that that is going to be one of the exploitable factors when they do face up against Team Liquid in that. I think Core is going to be very smart about it. And I think that APA is a player who I always have APA. I think that he always gets to he's a much more ONB type, very cerebral player. A
Right.
lot more of the perk
Okay.
style qualities where he understands that these are the waves that you need to be pushing. This is how that you actually gain advantages on the map to set the team up rather than having the highlight play in the team fight and the likes, right? And of course he has had pop-up performances as well. But I actually favor the NA team in this one
Okay.
because I do think that right now Humanoid is a player who I feel that psychologically his problem has always been that when he plays against players that he feels is worse than him,
Yep.
he ends up playing to that level,
Yes.
right? So it's a psychological thing where he doesn't take them seriously. He
Yes.
plays too disrespectfully in lane. And I think that that's the type of thing that UMT and APA would definitely
Yes.
might even look at punishing, which is what they did at MSI. So, and it's not something that Humanoid is going to lose once. So it's like, okay, I better I better pick up the kid gloves and play seriously the next time around.
Sure.
He's someone, at least in the past, who will be stuck in the mentality of like, this guy is shit. I'm just gonna go destroy him again. And as compared to when he's playing against the likes of Knights or Showmaker or Faker or Caps, where he then would give his 100% game, right?
Yes.
So this is, I think, it's quite a bad matchup for Fnatic, and I have the North American team winning that one.
Yeah, I will say, I not only do I agree, but I've also heard similar things from people who've worked with Humanoid that where basically, it's funny because it's a very counterintuitive problem because almost no other player has this. Usually players have the opposite problem. They do like what we said about Carmine. They beat on all the players that are shitter than them and look awesome, and then they play the better player and they look way worse. I agree with you. He's inverted. Like, as far as I can tell, he just actually can't sort of get mentally stimulated when he thinks he's playing someone bad or worse or not on his level, like you say. But as you say, one of the reasons why actually I think it's what saves his career and why he keeps staying in Fnatic forever is whenever you go international, but you pair him against like Scout, Faker, Chubb, when you put him against someone who he's not supposed to be, that's actually when he'll just summon one of his best games and he'll play on the edge of his mechanics and he'll look really good. And that's why everyone goes like the Jekyll and Hyde thing. Wow, it's Humanoid, he's back, he's so good. But that is, I agree, it's kind of fool's gold. Like, if anything, like you say, considering people do that thing where they try and diminish APL, like he's just trash talking, but he is obviously good on his champions. Like, if anything, he's primed to get the surprise. I agree with you. And they've obviously they've already scored first blood in the psychological war too. So I'm also interested if Fnatic's going to switch things up, if they play the same way. Because I also get the vibe, like, no matter what fans say, I think Fnatic themselves will be intimidated by this matchup. Like, they actually, in my opinion, got comprehensively beaten by Liquid. Because, again, Liquid's in the BDS sphere. Like, they win with their brain. Like, what they're doing makes sense and is clearly how they, like, game planned it. They're not just making random moves in the game, at least not for me, you know. What about,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, for Fnatic, I think they found success in the first half of the year, playing exploitative League of Legends. People didn't know how to team fight. They didn't know how to adapt to new map changes around the neutral objectives. Fnatic did spend time on that, and it showed, right? But now that
yes.
people are catching up, that edge is gone. So the exploitative factor isn't there. The champion pool and how the team understands team fighting around June isn't necessarily there. So I don't have Fnatic very high at the moment.
What about, let me think, I'll pick one last team we'll do. All right, I'll tell you what, we'll do GiantX, because here's my question for you. Opening remarks, I've talked about so many teams. I want to get your take. What do you think of Jackie's? I've kind of been impressed by this player, man. I'm kind of a fan now.
I I feel that Jackie is fool's goal. My eye test tells me that I don't think that this player is it. He's going to be very similar to
Okay.
Mateo, but right now a lot of people are hyping him. In fact, Mateo
Right,
actually
I
had
see.
like actual pop-up moments that tick the eye test, right? It's just that
Yeah,
there's some things around the tail where I felt that this is a player that requires very specific things to succeed.
right.
But whereas for Jackie's is this is a player where I feel that they did the same thing, right? Let's try to salvage a situation. They brought in D'Antonio, who is going to come in. He's going to play the tanks, the choke off, and
Yeah.
things like that, which
Very
means that the
cynical signing.
resources
Very cynical, yeah.
naturally has to go
Sure.
somewhere else,
Yes.
right? And once again, just to make this clear, right? I'm a fan of those type of moves because as a coach who has had to play firefighting
Yeah.
many times throughout my career, this is exactly the type of things that
Yes.
you're supposed to do. You go in
Yes.
there and say, okay, you're going to be on tank duty, right? As much as top laners hate being told that they
Of
need to do
course.
that, finding the right player who has the right mindset to do that is actually what can salvage a
Yes.
season for a team, right? And then the resources have to go somewhere, and it seems to be going to Jackie's. But I'm watching the way that he plays on some of these fights and things like that. I'm not convinced that this is not the same things that you'd see when you watch like Caps play, a Scout play,
Right.
a Knight play and stuff like that. This is someone who's gathered resources. He's put into positions where probably the team has drilled around, okay, this is how we play out these scenarios, and he's set up to succeed, and they have succeeded as far as they go.
Yeah, sometimes.
Maybe that gets him another year in the LEC, and power to him. Hopefully he continues to develop. But
Okay.
right now, if I'm going to be is you know how they have the meme, right? The $5, $4, $3, $2,
Oh,
$1
yeah,
kind of
sure.
situation. I wouldn't be considering Jackie's even if he was in a $1 scenario. That's where I'm at.
Oh,
I
holy
don't have
folly.
faith.
Okay.
in that player. I mean,
Right.
it sounds like it sounds
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
burn, right? But it's one of those things where it's always going to be ranked against the other mid laners there, and I'm very sure that there's going to be another mid laner that I would be happier to have
I
in that
mean, put it
position.
this way, the contrast you gave against Vitillo is obviously a good one because people have seen now he clearly needs a very specific type of setup. Like if he doesn't have it, he's just an okay player. He's not the monster that carried all those Misfits games. I know what you mean in that sense. That's why I asked at the outset what you think of Jackie's, because obviously the hard thing is for a layman, it looks like he's like the only good player in the team and everyone else sucks, right? But for you, he's set up to succeed and he should succeed in some scenarios.
Yeah.
Okay. But you're a bit skeptical that, like, for example, if I take him out and just all the GMs are looking for a mid laner, he's not the plug and play guy. You better construct a whole team around him. What do you think you would need around him if we go into the off season and all the players are on the board again? What type of team does he need? Do you think to be good?
So this is a GiantX GMing decision, right?
Yeah.
Like if we're going to rebuild next year around Jackies, what will we have? Funnily enough, keeping the antenna is not the worst idea, right?
Okay.
If the idea is to rebuild around Jackie's, keeping that chorus as long laners is not going to be the worst idea. And then something that I'm going to be looking for is if Trimby is available, I'm going to be probably building around a very strong bot lane,
Right.
right? Trimby upset, and then probably a strong jungler that can fit into that, right? But then is this necessarily the way that I'm going to be trying to win the LEC with? I don't think so. So it's one of those setting expectations kind of thing.
Right.
And if you are keeping Jackies in this scenario, despite all the things that I've said, it has to be that we're doing this for budget reasons. And probably doing something like that gets you to playoffs, continues to get you to playoff because it gives you a very coherent team identity. And then you're going to get the playoffs. You're going to finish 5th and 6th, 7 to 8, somewhere in the ballpark. You're not going to have the ignominy of finishing 9 to 10 and then having everybody clown on you. So it goes into where SK used to be if you go with this approach towards assembling a roster.
Let's just do some brief thoughts on the opening matchup. So SK versus Heretics. Is there an angle where Heretics can win this one? Is there upset potential?
Stylistically, I think that there's definitely ways for Heretics to win. Because I feel that SK they do not handle situations where people try to binge Niski on the side lanes very well, right?
Yes.
Because we saw that Team Heretics are definitely capable of doing that. But the way that SK plays is very reactive, very exploitative style of League of Legends, where if you just make mistakes against them, where Team Heretics are actually just making mistakes all the time, right? I think that it's very tough to see. It is possible, so there's a world when it happens, but the chances are is that Team Heretics they just lose to themselves. They start a dragon they shouldn't be starting. They look for a fight that they shouldn't be going for. People are not on the same page, and even then, in terms of player quality, Niski has had some big plays. The star quality and firepower can even compensate if Team Heretics do find themselves getting leads after intelligent map play, right?
Yes, I mean, to go all the way back, the main problem I have is even though SK can occasionally look a bit shaky and throw, can Heretics really, can they do anything with that? Can they? That's the biggest problem, again, you could come back to. At the end of the day, like in the same way as in a football team, it doesn't matter how much beautiful football you play, how many passes and what possession, someone has to be able to kick it in the net at the end. If you can't kick it in the net, you can't win the game. And in this analogy, Heretics has no strikers. So good luck. Like in this case, I guess they need the equivalent of like a Steven Gerrard 38-yard screamer into the top corner from, I don't know, fucking Trimby or something mental in this equation, or Yank or something. It doesn't really work. I'm with you on that one. Okay, Fnatic GX, the obvious angle here is it even plausible like GX can make this messy and somehow make it a fun series at least? Is it just going to be a whitewash for Fnatic? Where are you going with this one?
I mean, it should be a whitewash for Fnatic. I think that despite all of the flaws that I've mentioned earlier, Jax is still not a team there who I think has their things coherent enough, where I would say that they pose a threat to Fnatic. So I think that this is one of those where Fnatic should be able to take this, even if we see Dr. Jackal from Humanoid is going to be something that's one of those where even at the level that he's playing at, they should win it. Jun and Razok are too good to lose to this
Yes.
team.
I will say as well, the reason why you also know GX isn't a very good team is, in theory, if you're Ignite, you should be fucking loving it, mate. This is about the best it's going to get for you and the better. Like, if this isn't when you're shining, like, that bot lane's just never going to be good if it's not now. Like, come on, boys.
Ignore is the imposter, I swear.
He
This guy
is. He is.
he is just making so many unforced
Yeah.
errors on his own. He's putting his team into so many bad situations. It's one of
Yes.
those reasons where I have no faith in
No,
GiantX
no.
doing anything.
No. And then, by the way, I will also say, if people are wondering why I didn't make the whole episode just these matchups, I also think we've gotten very unlucky. And it's just a really bad set of opening matchups where it's really obvious who should win. And even stylistically, it's not that interesting. So, like, for example, there's a world where you could have put Mad Lions against some team that could. I think if there's ever a team that's just going to pick Mad Lions apart, surely BDS. Like, how does Mad Lions beat BDS? Come on.
I don't think that there is a world that happens at the moment, right?
Probably not, right?
I know the angle. For some reason, they bench Adam again, right? And they're
Okay.
gonna bench Adam and two
Okay.
other players as well because they had an
Right.
argument with the coach.
Okay. Okay, so
The same things that helped them
we're
beat
now
them
going
in
for
this.
things outside the server have to happen, right?
Yes.
Okay, right, sure. And then we've already we'll just do it quickly though. All right, here's what I'll ask you. Is there a world where KC wins a game? Can they win one game off G2? Is it doable for this roster? Do you think?
They'll need some very creative cheeses. They need to find some red buff at the bot gang kind of thing and really go all in on the upset thing. I think that the way the G2 has been drafting around Ashe and Caitlyn, it makes them vulnerable to such
Okay.
cheeses in general. So if they go on the tank and they really cook up something, I think that there is a world where they might have the chance to be in a position to win a game. And that's 3 layers deep in. That's how far in this has to be for that to be a world in which I see a KC win against G2.
Well, call us the LEC because we're off for the rest of this week.